Motorcycles in Mexico. In the fall of 1988, Brian Atwood gave me a call to see if I was interested in riding motorcycles in Mexico. The tour was sponsored by a guy from Beaumont who had previously done archaeological tours. Les French had also invited a well-known magazine writer on the tour for publicity. We met in Presidio at the only motel in town and were to drive to Creel in the heart of the Copper Canyon the next day. Our crew consisted of Brian Atwood, Dave Dahlman, Jim Exum, and myself. There was an engineer from New Hampshire, an architect from North Carolina, a retiree from Austin, 2 middle-aged desert riders from California, and 4 guys from the Beaumont area. It was a diverse group who hit it off from the start. The Copper Canyon area is located about 150 miles south of Chihuahua High in the mountains. There are actually several canyons that make up this fantastic geological area. The edges of the canyon walls are at an elevation of about 7,000 feet, while the rivers that continue to cut deeper are at approximately 1,000 feet of elevation. This is deeper than the Grand Canyon of Arizona, and the size of the area is larger than the Grand Canyon also. This area of Mexico is inhabited by the Tarahumara Indians. They maintain their cultural integrity and do not mix much with the gringos or the Mexicans. The colorfully dressed women with their babies slung papoose style on their backs and the diaper-garbed men add interest to this area. Our agenda was to ride out of Creel each day to view the wonders of the canyon and enjoy the uninhibited thrills of open country riding. We gazed off the rim of the canyon at Divisadero, where the train disgorges European tourists and Mexican peasants alike. We rode to the Boza Chica Falls, where the river suddenly bursts over the rim of the canyon, falling over 2,000 feet to the rock floor. The biggest thrill was the overnight trip to the city of Botepias. The little village is located at the bottom of the canyon. It has no electricity, no running water, no restaurants, none of the things required for a tourist trap. The climate is tropical even in the winter. It had been a rich mining town in the early 1800s, and white plastered ornamented buildings line the street to the plaza at the middle of town. The river flows along beside the main street, and the people use the clear water for bathing, washing clothes, and drinking. There is little noise from motors, TVs, or other intrusive noises of 20th century civilization. After an hour in town, you feel as if you have slipped back into the Mexico of the 1800s, where Zorro rode on his black horse. Several horses roam the street, unattended, for there is no place for them to go. The steep canyon walls and the one rock road that leads out isolate everyone and everything. There are also a few pigs, chickens, and dogs that claim their part of the streets also. It is strange that these animals made such an impression. The beautiful stallion that follows strangers around town looking for a handout of food. The old Doberman Pinscher that was totally blind and walked the gutter with his nose bumping the cobblestones like a blind man's cane. The merchant's dog and the pig were the funniest though. The large battle-scarred mongrel claimed as his territory the street bounded by the general store, the Catholic church, and our hotel. Every time someone entered this section of street, he would rise from his post at the door of the general store and walk to greet them. The local people all knew his name and would say a word and give his head a pat. As we sat in front of our hotel taking in this local action, a pig, sniffing and rooting in the dust, worked his way down the street. He stopped at the edge of the hotel, but he must have sensed the tiny morsels or crumbs that had been dropped near the entrance. He boldly entered the forbidden zone and headed for the scraps. Suddenly the old dog was upon him, barking, growling, snapping at his hindquarters, and sounding like the hound of the Baskervilles. The pig squealed and screeched as if being boiled and ran like hell for the side street. The old dog pursued in a dead run, biting all the time at the pig's rump. Suddenly at the edge of the hotel, the dog stopped and calmly turned away, looking around as if nothing had happened. The pig stopped also, not 10 feet from the dog, and started rooting and sniffing in the dust just as before. I wondered how many times the two had tried each other's boundaries. It was a 110-mile ride from Creel, and when we arrived here, we were ready for a beer and food. Beer would be hard to come by. The town was dry, no alcohol, something about the Indians. The Federals had stopped us on the road just outside of town. Our brightly colored riding gear and roaring motorcycles were probably as much a shock to them as encountering 18-year-olds with machine guns was to us. They let us pass unmolested, but our van full of gear and beer did not fare so well. Les French had to give away 4 cases of beer to pass the inspection. That night after supper we had a formal visit by the local law enforcement officers, and we all sat around and drank what was left of our beer. Supper was arranged at a local woman's house by the river. Grandmother, mother, and daughter all worked in the candle-lit adobe kitchen on a wood-burning stove to prepare the meal of beans, tortillas, macaroni, and rice. We ate on chrome dinette tables in the large room where the whole family slept. The floor was dirt, but the house was clean and neat. The side of the house facing the river was completely open, no wall, enclosed only by fruit trees and the greenery of the patio. We sat around the square that night in the moonlight watching the teenagers court and the little children play with their rolling hoops. Apparently, the toy fad was a plastic hoop much like a hula hoop that was rolled along in front and controlled by a wire wand with a reverse hook on the end. I had seen old pictures of kids rolling hoops. We showed one of the kids how to hula the hoop around his middle, and it was like watching the creation of the wheel. It spread like wildfire and soon they were all trying it. The next day we were on our way back to Creel and leaving this time capsule of a village. As we gassed and slid the bikes up the switchbacks, the temperature dropped from 90 to 80 to 70 and finally at the rim, back to the fall mountain cool of 60 degrees. At the final meal that night Les gave awards for the trip. I received a t-shirt and the 175 cubic centimeters Expert Rider Award. I had blasted my way along on the little 175 cubic centimeters Yamaha while everyone else rode 350s to 650. We had ridden over 500 miles in 4 days and loved every minute of it. Same place next year. The Mexican trail ride has now been added to our list of things to do to ward off the middle-aged dull. We returned the very next fall to Creel to try out the riding and explore on our own. Brian Atwood, Jim Exum, Mike from Athens and yours truly. We figured we didn't need to pay to ride along behind someone and eat their dust. Our strategy was to follow the smallest mountain road that seemed to lead into areas on the map that were void of hard surface roads or towns. We were rewarded with isolated little Indian villages, beautiful rivers and valleys, and the thrill of going where no man had gone before. Well, at least, maybe, no gringo within the last few months. The Mexicans in this area who can scrape the money together for a truck, make their living by cutting trees, stripping them, and hand-loading them on old Chevy flatbeds. They creep along the barely passable rock roads, fixing flats every few miles, to finally arrive at the hard top where a local sawmill operates. The people that don't log seem to make their way by growing a little corn, raising a few chickens, and sometimes even a pig. At one small farm, we stopped to inquire about directions, and found that after introductions the man of the house had never heard of Texas. We were headquartered at Creel, same as last year, and at one little village we talked with several people that had never been to Creel. When we left that village we had a little race for home, and with nobbies flying and dust blowing, covered the 40 miles or so in less than 2 hours. I think there are several reasons why we like the Mexico trail rides. There is such a contrast in the hell-bent for leather, cross-country dirt bike riding and the serenely quiet, slow-paced, lost-in-time atmosphere of this area. Being able to get a big adrenaline rush by power sliding the bike around a mountain road curve and wheeling across the small mountain stream and race to be first to slide up in front of the little adobe house with a Carte Blanca sign nailed to the front fence. We strip off the dust-covered gear, lean back in the homemade wooden chairs, look up into the willow trees and sip a beer while the only sounds you hear are the clucking of hens and whispering of young siblings in awe of the fearsome Knights of the Nobbies, who have come out of nowhere. Talk is of close calls on the road, of strange sights, and of the peacefulness of this place. We had looked forward to returning to Botapias since the day we left last year. The sleepy village was just as we had left it. There was one disturbing development, however. The Mexican government was about to reopen the gold and silver mine that had originally provided the wealth to this area in the early 1800s. There was a contingent of officials from the power company who had driven in from Mexico City in a Suburban to look over the village. The electricity would be required to run the mining equipment and the town would benefit from becoming electrified. The big town big shots were less than friendly and we had a chance to vent our disdain for them and their electricity on our return trip out of the canyon. We dusted the group as they changed a tire on the wounded Suburban. I was now riding the same Honda 350 XR that Brian had taken to Mexico last year. He purchased the bike second-hand for $800 and used it on that first trip, then sold it to me after watching me torture the little 175 cubic centimeters Yamaha. My middle-aged 200-plus pounds really needs the larger bike. He now rides a 600 cubic centimeters Honda but covets the handling and light weight of my 350. His only satisfaction comes when we hit the pavement and he blasts by me at 80 miles per hour plus. That's alright though. I know my time will come when that only trail out is littered with 15-inch logs that must be jumped or manhandled over. Monterey motorcycling. Doc, the dentist from Beaumont, called up Brian and invited our crew to meet the Beaumont bunch in Monterey at the Cola de Cabello Hacienda. Doc was going to show us all the trails around this beautiful mountain area of Mexico. It ended up that after the great Mexican fried fish feast and tequila drinking contest at the Beaumont crew didn't do much more riding. The Cascada Cola de Cabello, Horsedale Falls, was just up the road from our hotel, which was perched on the side of a mountain about 30 miles south of Monterey. It is a popular place on the weekends for the Mexicans to picnic and party. The area is not nearly as remote and has no Indians like the Copper Canyon area, but the mountains are much more spectacular. A short ride up the winding smooth asphalt road ends in the branching mountain rock roads that lead to the many remote villages that dot the mountain valleys. Again, we have the contrast and thrill of luxury, well almost, hotel accommodations and fine food, then a high-speed run up the mountain road, and suddenly the beauty and peace of another time. Our favorite place here is a little village of 6 or so houses where the mountain road winds through the front yards and out through the garden patch and pig pens. This is where we stop and ask for a tour to the falls. Even though we can see only 2 burros in the corral and there are 8 of us, the cowboy-dressed man of the house assures us everything is okay. In a few minutes, a young girl with a burro, another young man with a horse, one by one our transportation appears. I felt somewhat embarrassed by the young man leading my horse as I sat atop the mighty steed. After all, why should I, a grown man, and an excellent skilled motorcycle rider, have to have some peon in sandals to lead my horse? A few minutes later, down the trail toward the bottom of the remote canyon, my embarrassment was pushed aside by naked fear. The trail was so steep that you had to lean way back in the saddle and brace against the horse's rear. The trail was only inches wide and the carefully placed hooves of the horse would slide forward with each step. The view from the back of this 20-foot-high horse made me wish I had kept on my motorcycle helmet. It was quite a caravan, Dave and I aboard these exceptionally tall horses and several of the others aboard burros so small that their riders' feet were dragging. Something to do with the size of the loads, I presume. I was struck with the contrasts and similarities to the horseback trip into the hidden city of Petra in Jordan. The brooding robed Arab leading my horse there was replaced by a humble shy Mexican. The spirited Arabian pony was replaced by a half mule, half horse. The silent person, plodding along in front of my steed, with the same cultural and lingual gap, making communication impossible, was the same. I felt the same awkwardness having someone walk while I rode. On the trip out, that awkwardness was replaced again by thankfulness as the horse and pedestrian struggled up the steep trail. The last quarter of a mile was on foot as the trail was too steep and dangerous for even the burros. The final descent into the canyon brought us under boulders larger than houses, and all the time the sound of the waterfall grew louder. As you looked up through the trees, isolated on the side of the canyon walls were giant cave openings. Thoughts of Spanish or Indian treasure and exploring opportunities made us wish for our rock climbing equipment. The mist above the trees with the sun shining over the canyon edge forms a permanent rainbow above your head as the 200-foot waterfall and deep green pool at its base come into full perspective. It is a picture from some old Tarzan movie. The giant clear pool at the base of the falls is surrounded by steep moss-covered rock walls. The minerals from the mist have formed stalactites on the overhanging rocks, and it is as if an underground wonderland has been exposed to our view. Behind the base of the falls is a cave partially hidden from view by the falling water. Out of the veil of water walks a beautiful nude woman. Nah, sorry about that, just got carried away. It was all true, honest, except for that part about the beautiful woman. Can you believe me now when I tell you that the water from the first pool drops through a series of little steps like some big city park thing, and then flows down a perfect smooth rock slide into a second giant green pool? I know you've seen the people slide down that Hawaiian waterfall. Well, I swear it's the same thing, except better. The second pool looks like it was cut from the canyon floor with a biscuit cutter. Its smooth rock sides drop straight down about 30 feet to the water. Makes you wonder if this is one of those places the Mayans threw in the virgins. Since the water was cold and we had no virgins, we settled for soaking our feet in beer, and being amazed at our good fortune to see and be and do. Actually, this beautiful no-name falls is not the reason this little village is our favorite place. The next house down the hill from our tour headquarters is run by a little lady of about 80 years young. She is about 5 feet tall and has a smile at least 2 foot wide. The house is built of timber and filled with adobe and white plaster. We sat on the porch enjoying our cocoas and the hospitality of this man and wife. She fired up the big iron cook stove and started hand-making tortillas just as if the kids had suddenly dropped in on Grandma. We sat and ate the hot tortillas right from the iron stove top, and her little hands tossed one after another back and forth in the practiced fashion of the tortilla maker. Finally, we convinced her that we could eat no more, and she went about her chores of sweeping the hard-packed earth in front of the porch with a handmade broom. Of course, we had to get our picture made with her just like any good tourist would. After all, weren't we riding Japanese motorcycles? The old man of the house sat quietly over to the side and would smile and nod when we tried to do our Spanish language thing. We sat there looking down the hillside at the fruit trees, the animals, the cozy neat house and barn, the giggling kids, and tried to imagine how we would live here if given the chance. Our eyes glassed over and the quiet starts to settle in when someone hits the bottom of their Coke and says, "Race ya to the highway." I did learn a little more Spanish on this trip. We were staying near the Cascada Cola de Cabello, Horsedale Falls, Cascade, Waterfall. Cabello, horse. Cola, tail. The beverage of choice in this area is Coca, a Coke. Therefore, the proper way to get a Coca-Cola is to ask for a Coca. It is not, as I learned from experience, proper to ask for a Cola.